Kenner inspired Kal-El. Here's your look at McFarlane Toys. Superpowers Superman. Superman is virtually invulnerable and has the powers of super strength, super speed, and flight. He also has enhanced senses, including heat vision, X-ray vision, super hearing, and super breath. Stopping ourselves first before looking at Superpowers Superman to grab ourselves the tape measure, just to see how tall the figure stands. I know this line has been around for a bit. I finally had the chance to find this in the wild. I know, sure enough, I could have just easily ordered these online, but the price of what they would convert to, I'd probably be paying at least double the price for these figures. I ended up finding these finally at my local Walmart stores, and I think the price point for these were about $15. That I can manage. I wouldn't have not wanted to pay like $25, $30 for the same figures online, but I did find Superman, I did find Batman, and I picked up those two figures, leaving behind Darkseid. I might still go back and pick up Darkseid. Either way, though, the figures are quite small. Superman, in this case, is only about 4¼ inches in height, or he's about 10 centimeters tall. And one of my most regretted lines I never got into nearly enough as a kid was the Superpowers figures. I had some random ones I would get for Christmas, like Tornado and Martian Manhunter, Red Tornado and Martian Manhunter, but never really getting the big wigs like Superman and Batman. Eventually, I did get myself a Superman, but it wasn't under the Superpowers line. Kenner had released this figure later on, well, not this figure, but they had re-released the Superman with a kryptonite ring. That was the Superman I ended up picking up, and I really wish I could still have had that figure so I could brought him in for comparisons. But what I do have, though, I'm going to move over Superman. I'm going to work with what I have. I'm going to bring in the Superpowers Green Lantern, making the only loose figure that I have from the Superpowers line. Again, I really wish that was a toy line I got more into as a kid. Now, in this case, Green Lantern, I know many of you probably have also said, well, wait a minute, didn't you also have a sealed Superpowers Joker? I'm not opening up the Superpowers Joker just for size comparisons. That one's going to keep nicely in my collection, still sealed and in card. But the loose figure-wise, at least, when you're looking at them next to Green Lantern, I think they're pretty sized well. I don't think they've changed much in the way of Superman's body. They have given him, granted, a brand new head sculpt and a different cape. But I think he's still in line with some of those older Superpowers figures if you still have those. Lucky on you if you still have those as part of your collection. Speaking of collecting, though, I just want to show you guys the card packaging that came included with this figure. It has a classic look of the old Superpowers line with Superman, of course, flying off on the side. Superpowers, of course, on the top. It says new for 2022. And then on the back, not only do you have your read-up in different languages, but advertised as well as the other three characters that made up the first wave. That being Superman, that being Darkseid, that being Batman. Only picked up the sandwiched ones on either side, leaving Darkseid behind. There's also a Batwing and a Supermobile, which was kind of strange to see Superman flying around in a Supermobile. I was pretended, at least when my friend had these back in the day, I was pretended that was the ship that he got from Krypton. I'm going to go with that, even though it's a little strange to see fists on the front of the Supermobile. Anyways, to move that out of the way, getting a closer look here at Superman. Now, Superman did have the cape. The cape was a separate piece that attached onto the back of the figure's body. When you first remove it from its tray, just make sure that you don't throw out the tray without retrieving first the cape. The cape is a separate piece. Put Superman down here for a second. The cape is decent. I'm not sure I really love the material that they used. It really does develop wrinkles real fast. And the way they've also sewn this around, the old capes would have been a little more of a softer material than this, I believe. But they also would have worked the same way of having this C-clip on the top. They essentially would have just sewn the fabric around that. And this clip would have been the thing that clamps onto the back of the character's head. Now, this I find is a little on the more messier side, the way they've stitched this around the top of the collar piece. When, of course, you're attaching onto Superman, you're just going to take that C-clip and clip it around his neck, and then just sort of do your best to straighten out the cape around him. Again, I think the material that they decided to go with, first of all, is I think too shiny, but it also seems to develop a lot more wrinkles than what I remember with those older toys. I mean, you can see a few of the wrinkles just left behind from leaving in the packaging. He does have the yellow emblem, although I do feel it has to be a little smaller and a little further down on his body. It probably should be like right around here instead of as high as it actually is. Again, I think it's way too big for the cape. At least from the front of the figure, it looks good. Now, the original figure would have also had a feature where you would have squeezed the legs and Superman would have punched. They've done away with that feature altogether. And just again, put Superman down here for a second. Bringing back in Green Lantern. Green Lanterns work the same way that you squeeze the legs, and you can see his arms swung up, showing off his might of his Green Lantern's light. Again, I really wish that if they would continue the trend of releasing the superpowers figures based on the real old original vintage toy line, that they would have also kept the feature intact, the gimmick of having Superman's arms, at least one of them swaying up like this, flaying up like that. But yeah, you don't really have that feature. You can squeeze the legs on Superman all you want. He's not going to be doing much of anything. Now, the original Superman figure would have had a different head sculpt altogether than what we get right here. Some would say if they continued the trend, really continued the line on, it would have been nice that they could have used the original head sculpts. I don't know what licensing-wise, if they had the rights to be able to use the head, or if they just decided they want to do a brand new head instead. The head is pretty close. There are a few little allowances that they've made. For example, I think the original Superman figure had his head sitting a little higher on his neck. This one sits pretty close to his neck, and it even makes I feel like the cape stand a little bit more. It almost looks as if he's got maybe Doctor Strange's cape, just for how high the collar piece actually is. One thing that also was different about the original superpowers from Kenner was that the emblem on Superman's torso was a lot larger, and it was also higher up on his torso. They decided in this case to make the size of it smaller, and also brought it a little bit more centered to his body. Not bothered by that, because I do think like the emblem, as good as it was on the original toy, maybe was a little too high and too close to his neck. One thing that also was really funny about the original Kenner's one, I'm just going to bring the arms up, was that the trunks on the legs, at least the sides here, were higher up. They weren't actually in line with the center section of his trunks. The sides of his trunks actually were up here, up at the top there. So there was a very obvious space where there was a lot more blue of his leg and a lot less red of his trunks. I think they've done a better job here of actually aligning the trunks so that they look like they're all part of the same piece. Does have the belt done in almost a very similar type of fashion. Of course, you got the circular oval there done in the yellow. It's a really good, faithful recreation of Superman, short of the fact that the head sculpt is a little bit different. I don't know why I would say I love the head sculpt, but I think in line with what they've done for the superpowers so far, I think it's a pretty good modernized version of Superman. Not keeping it too overly complicated. They kind of really went more of a stylized look for Superman's face. I think it works, but I think I'm still attached to the idea of Superman from Superpowers looking a different way, a specific way, that the head sculpt here comes up a little short, just a little bit short. The head also seems a little bit small, too, when you compare it to the rest of his body. Again, like the paint on this, no real complaints to the paint. I think they've done a pretty good job on the paint. And even like the original toys, they still managed to incorporate the articulation in the knees. I always thought like the legs on these superpowers were only just straight knees. But then if you look at the Green Lantern, for example, he does have hinges. So like the original toy line also did have hinges. So all the articulation is still intact from the original 80s line. Speaking of the articulation, the head is not so much on a ball joint. It does swivel, but you can't move it up and down. So you can only really do that. And while doing that, you may find yourself also shimmying the cape. So you may want to just adjust that. There we go. The arms do move forward and back. You can't move them out. They're just regular points of articulation from back in the 80s toy line. You would be able to still move the legs forward. So, for example, when Superman eventually sits inside his Supermobile, I might still decide to pick that up. I can actually have him sitting inside of it. I do actually have a sealed Batman Batmobile from Superpowers as well. Never had the chance really to review it because I never had a Superpowers Batman. Maybe I might just do a review with the McFarlane Toys Batman and maybe have a look at that as a retro review. Let me know if that's something you guys would certainly like to see. And yes, Superman does have the knee bend. So that's one thing as well that was still intact from the original Kenner line back in the day. I mean, overall, it's a good line. At one point, I sort of questioned, like, why would they have released Superpowers and not just have them kept to the same mold as what the original 80s toy line was? Again, maybe it had something to do with licensing. Maybe they also wanted just to do something fresh, give them a brand new head sculpt. The head sculpt's pretty close to the original way that Superman looked from the Kenner line. The rest of his body still stays intact. The only thing, unfortunately, the figure lacks in, that was obviously there in the original toy line, was the flailing fist, the one arm that he could actually move when you pinched his legs. Unfortunately, that's been done away with altogether. Some would say that that's the one thing that gave the charm to the superpowers. But still, I think it's a fairly good, faithful recreation to the way that we would have had those superpowers toys back in the day. Well, at least most of us. This guy passed when he was younger and regretted it ever since now as an adult. Even though this really is a modern toy line, I am so tempted to go back to the store where I finally found these and pick up a second set of them, at least the Batman and the Superman, and keep them on the card. Because the card looks so vintage and a really nice recreation on McFarlane's team, I really am considering getting a second set of these. One to display loose on the shelf, one of course to review here for you guys, but then to keep a second set that I can keep sealed. I'm never really going to be able to convince myself, nor to any of my friends that are going to be coming over to look at them, that they're of the original vintage toy line. I would love to get my hands on, believe you me, even loose versions of superpowers, but they have now skyrocketed over the years that they've passed, and of course now to find them on eBay, even to find loose versions of Supes and Bats, the prices are crazy on them. Crazy, stupid money. But I do like the look of these. There's something honestly a little off about this Superman, and I'm not sure what it is exactly. Maybe it's how much cape is overlapping onto his shoulders. Maybe it's the type of material that they use for the cape. Maybe it's just the sense that when I'm looking at this, I really want to be looking at the vintage toy, and I'm not. And the things that are reminding me that it's not is the fact that the gimmick has gone away, and he's also getting a brand new head sculpt. Some have said that the head sculpts aren't great. I do think like the Superman honestly looks a little bit better than the Batman that we will be looking at in upcoming videos, but I think it does the job well enough to give us kind of these superpowers figures that we would have had back in the day. And again, they did release vehicles, so we will be at some point looking at the Batwing, the Supermobile, and I think they've released one other vehicle as well since then. I hope at some point they do decide to release the Batmobile. Even though I still have the original Superpowers Batmobile, I just, again, never had the chance to review it because I never had a figure to actually sit inside of it. You can't believe that anybody would be having a Green Lantern driving around with a Batmobile, and I know somebody would call me on it. So maybe I might just consider to use the Superpowers Batman and have, for the purpose of reviewing the Batmobile, maybe use that instead. Some would yell out, blasphemy, blasphemy, you got to use the original vintage toy. I don't have the original vintage toy. Sadly, just the prices on them. You got to honestly look at the prices of what they're going for on eBay and realize right away. That's why I haven't been able to track down. Maybe if I can find them at a local toy convention or something along those lines for a good price, or somebody takes pity on me, about the only way I might be able to get my hands on some of those classic Superpowers figures. But I think this one does a good enough job of giving us Superpowers figures without giving us those original vintage toys. Let me know down below in the comments section, have you been on board collecting the Superpowers figures, or do you think, again, there's maybe something a little bit off about the toy line? Again, I think that the Superman does it better than the Batman. The Batman's head sculpt is a little, I think, off. But again, we're going to talk more about that when we have a look at him in his own standalone review. If you did enjoy this video, hit it a like. If you're loving the content you're seeing and do want to stick around for more, then make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the bell notification. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.